Good day, everyone. The Group 5 are here today to present one of the mysterious chemical sense experiences in the field of physiological psychology that some questions have remained unsolved. However, researchers nowadays have made several case studies and experimental design researchers to delve deeper into the physiological processes occurring in synesthetic experiences. Of all forms of synesthesia, the experimental case studies that will be discussed by our group is word gustatory synesthesia, which is quite uncommon. In this form of synesthesia, love as being the taste of bitterness or sweetness is a valid, not a form of emotions and feelings anymore, but solely the taste of love. Okay, kidding aside, let's proceed to the background of the study.
Good day, everyone. Let us now discuss the word gustatory synesthesia. Word gustatory synesthesia is a neurological condition in which information intended to activate one of your senses actually stimulates others. The conscious, involuntary, and unitary experience of cross-modal sensory association are referred to as synesthesia. It is distinct from creative metaphor and other intentional correlation of sensory information since it is a consistent sensory experience. People who have synesthesia are synesthetes. One of the types of this perceptual phenomenon is lexical synesthesia, which means that saying certain words can trigger your sense of taste. In severe cases, even just reading or thinking about words can cause synesthetes to have their mouths flooded with flavor. It is where a chromatic number and words are viewed as reliably and distinctively colored. Under lexical synesthesia, we have the word gustatory synesthesia. Only 5 studies in the literature have described probable developing example of synesthesia in which specific words, spoken or read, operate as the inducer and taste are the concurrents. The word gustatory synesthesia is determined by whether the word presented is a legal non-word or a part of the lexicon. These findings are supplemented by the documentation of a synesthetic participant's reaction to a huge corpus of words and lawful non-words. The current study investigates the link between the frequency of word used in written English and word gustatory synesthesia. This is an intriguing topic of research because it allows researchers to examine the roles of genetics, neurobiological factors, and life events in the generation of word gustatory synesthesia. Some of the neurological changes described above have been proposed to be under the control of a specific mutated genes in this form of synesthesia, which appears to have a heritable component. Individuals with word gustatory synesthesia have unique tastes in response to homophones and similar sounding letters, highlighting the importance of life experience in word gustatory synesthesia. Synesthetic perception are made up of 2 major components: the stimulus modality that causes the experience, the inducer, and the synesthetic perception modality that results from the event, the concurrent. The inducer and concurrent belong to different sensory modalities, are unidirectional, and have extremely particular relationships. So let's now go to the case history. TD, a native English-speaking female with right hand dominance, a participant experiencing word gustatory synesthesia. So TD had been exposed to the word gustatory synesthesia her entire childhood, but in 5th grade, she observed that the synesthetic sensation was not the same. She reported that gustatory sensation connected with words were her major experience of the roof of the mouth and the center of the tongue. There were no relatives with synesthesia that TD was aware of. TD couldn't place her synesthesia in any one situation of environment. The word gustatory synesthesia is typically induced in circumstances such as reading, speaking and listening to others. TD stated that her synesthetic experiences do not interfere with her concentration or cause other problems in her daily life. On the other hand, she stated that she has very aversive gustatory sensation with some words, which she refers to as ugly words, and that she will go to great length and avoid speaking or writing them. When asked about the ugly words, TD came up with a list of 20 of them, including notice, portable, mind, and consignati. TD mentioned that she chooses her synesthesia to help her remember things, stating that broad taste linked with a term or concept that attempting to remember may often jog her memory. In addition to word gustatory synesthesia, TD strongly linked specific colors with specific day of the week and months and utilized different color pens in her day planner for different months. So now let's talk about methodology.
For us to further conceptualize TD's reported responses to words, there were two lists created and presented to her. The first list is the 950 English words randomly selected from the 3ESL list, a component of the public domain 12 Dicks English Words Archive. And to create a final list of 806 words, hyphenated words, food words, letters, abbreviations, and contractions were removed. The second list is the computer software random word generator, and it was used to create a list of 222 grammatically correct nonsense words. Each of these lists was presented twice and in alphabetically order to TD, with 3 months separating each presentation. The list was not randomized in order to facilitate the analysis. And at the time of each presentation, TD was instructed to provide the following for each stimulus. The first one is the description of the gustatory sensation invoked. This is to be able to indicate if nothing was experienced. The second one, a rating of the intensity of the gustatory experience from 0 to 10. Low to high and 0 if nothing was experienced. And lastly, an indication if the invoked experience was aversive. TD was given an ample time to complete her responses to each list of stimulus.
The consistency of TD's report of the gustatory feelings induced by each stimulus across the two presentations was coded in order to better understand the responses. So each stimulus was assigned to one of four categories, namely identical, nearly identical, conceptually related, and unrelated, along with the examples of each category from TD's responses from the first and second presentation. As we can see on the table, in the first category, her response to the first and second presentation, which is meatballs and sauce, is coded as identical due to her response is the same. Second, her response to coffee versus black coffee is coded as nearly identical. For the third example, hot dog, she responded sausage, which is coded as conceptually related. And last is the vanilla cake batter, and she responded applesauce, which is coded as unrelated due to it is out of the concept. So, to help assess if TD's synesthesia is genuine, the consistency of her reported experience was quantified by correlating her subjective intensity ratings of the word and non-word stimuli across the two presentations. Since the presentation of each list was separated by 3 months, a significant correlation could suggest that TD's reported responses are highly stable. So in spite of this assertion, the correlations of TD's responses mean little outside of the context of the performance of non-synesthetic control participants in the similar task. So they demonstrated here that non-synesthetes are remarkably able to produce consistent multimodal association. So to address this concern, two control group was constructed. Yan. The first control group was named Correlation Control Task. So in this task, a group of 9 age-matched college females without synesthesia were given a list of 80 stimuli consisting of 40 words and 40 non-words, which were randomly chosen from a total of 806 words and 223 non-words that were presented to TD twice. So the first set of lists given to TD were presented twice with a 3-month gap between each presentation. So each participant was directed to free associate the taste of a food or drink item with each stimulus. Think that the participants were actually tasting these sensations and assess the intensity of these imagined experiences on the scale of 1 to 10. They also informed all participants that they will recollect their responses at a later time and that they will be asked to respond to each stimulus indicated. So the instruction for the second presentation were identical as the first, except that the participants were instructed to recollect as accurately as possible their free association with each stimulus during the first session. So they were given a limited time to finish their comments. Subjective intensity ratings were correlated across the two presentations for each participant, and a z-score was utilized to evaluate the correlation of TD's responses with the distribution of control participant replies. So in order to give evidence to address TD's ability to establish this such associations, her abilities were compared to those of a group of age-matched females without synesthesia using the second control group task, and they named it association control task. So in this task, a group of 46 stimuli was provided to both TD and a group of 10 college-age female students. So this list was made up of 23 words and 23 non-words randomly chosen from the 318 words and 160 non-words. So this is from the original list shown to TD that failed to generate a synesthetic reaction to TD on both first presentation. So these were presented twice with a 14-day gap between each presentation. So both TD and controlled female were asked to free associate a food, drink item, or taste with each word or um, non-word during the first presentation. And they were told also that they would be needed to recall their replies later. So members of the TD and control groups were also told to respond to each stimuli of the uh, category listed. So the instruction for the second presentation were largely the same as the first, with the exception that the participants were instructed to recollect as accurately as possible their free association with each stimulus during the first presentation. So after that, for each presentation, the stimulus order was randomized, and both TD and the control participants were given 10 minutes to finish their responses. Using the same criterion, the consistency of free association to each stimulus was assigned to one of 4 categories.
For the presentation of data and analysis of results, to statistically analyze the data and to compare the means of TD's responses in two presentations, the researchers use correlation method to see if there is a consistency to her synesthetic experiences across the two presentations, with 3 months gap in between. Indeed, the subjective ratings found out that the correlation coefficient is R is equal to 0.77 with a p-value less than the alpha level of the research. With the coefficient of 0.77 and a lesser p-value, we can conclude that there is a positive correlation between the two presentations. Therefore, there is a consistency in her synesthetic responses. The correlation data between the mean responses of TD and the correlation control task across representations are, in words, we have the correlation coefficient of R is equal to 0.29 with a standard deviation of 0.24 and p-value of 0.30. While in non-words, we have coefficient of R 0.16, standard deviation of 0.224, and p-value of 0.40. Considering the p-values of both words and non-words, researchers have concluded that there was no significant correlation between the subjective ratings of correlation control group and TD's responses. It is proved that TD's synesthetic experiences are peculiar and genuine as compared to non-synesthetic control group. As I mentioned earlier in research, association control group and TD were presented 46 words that failed to evoke synesthetic responses to TD to test if TD has the ability to perform novel cross-modal associations to the words that have no gustatory sensations to her. As compared with the control group, TD has shown a high level of consistency in forming cross-modal associations. She can effortlessly recall words that have no synesthetic responses after the presentations. As you can see on the table above, TD have recalled 24 identical words, which is greater from the identical recalled words in control group that has an average count of only 4.8. And unrelated words are much greater in the control group that has an average count of 37.8 as compared with TD that only unrelated words in average of 14 words. This concludes that TD is using her synesthetic experiences to facilitate memory recall. But in this experiment with the association control group, how could she possibly correctly recall the words, the taste of the words, when the words that are presented have no synesthetic responses to her? This mnemonic aid associated with her will later be discussed in the discussion chapter. Okay, so here it is the summary of TD's responses to the words and non-words provided across the both presentations with a gap of three months. So out of 806 English words, they were presented to TD. 216 produced identical responses or accurate responses. Okay, so this table summarizes these responses in non-words and words presentations. Out of 806 presented words and 222 non-words, both presentations have invoked synesthetic response to her with 381 responses. 802 out of 806 are not aversive to her, and no aversive words in non-words at all. 760 words are non-phonologically nor semantically linked in gustatory response, and only 2 in non-words. So here, researchers use Kruskal-Wallis test to compare the mean word frequency and the three types of experiences, which is both experiences, either one of the experiences or the presentation, and neither of the presentation. Kruskal-Wallis test is a non-parametric alternative of one-way ANOVA, but it considers ranking. Now the results are the H test of a mean word frequency in three group of presentations in experiences are 19.9 with a p-value less than the alpha level. This means that the mean word frequency is significantly correlated in the three experiences. Considering each of the experiences, synesthetic experience one has an in one experience only has an H test of 13.5 with p-value of 0.0002, which again lesser than the alpha value. On the other hand, synesthetic experiences in neither presentations have an H test of 12.8 with a p-value of 0.0003. That is less than the alpha value again. And in both presentations, p-value are 0.96 which means that the synesthetic experiences on both presentations and mean-word frequency are closely related to the four group of experiences, which is the identical, nearly identical, conceptually related, and unrelated that was discussed earlier in methodology. Now let's proceed to the discussions of this data and the results.
Good day to all of you. I am Francis Babon, and I will be presenting the discussion part of this case study. So 806 English words were presented over a 3-month span. TD had shown synesthetic responses in 381 or 47.3% on both presentations. Of these 381 words, 338 or 88.7% were identical across both presentations. Descriptive analysis indicated that the subjective intensity of words and non-words is quite similar. TD synesthesia shows high consistency and appeared to be genuine. Meanwhile, TD's extraordinary performance in control-free association tasks are due to her strategy of which she mentally links the non-words to English words that consistently produce gustatory sensations. She uses her synesthetic experiences to facilitate memory recall. Furthermore, TD's synesthetic responses are heavily dependent upon life experiences and interaction with the words and concept that each word represents. Subjective descriptions of her experiences are 88.7% identical to words and 70.4% identical to non-words. Lastly, aversive synesthetic experiences in English words are rarely induced and completely absent in non-words. Aversive words were probably developed due to negative associations, indirect personal experiences, and complex linguistic factors. But this issue remains one of the unsolved questions in word gustatory synesthesia. That's all. Thank you.
For the conclusion, TD, who is a 20-year-old woman that was diagnosed with word gustatory synesthesia and has been living with it for her whole life, participated in this case study in which they found out that her responses to either words and non-words were consistent and detailed. Some of the examples here as presented are words like infinity that she said that tasted like napkin with gravy on it, and abortive that tasted like meatballs and sauce. For non-words, examples are anfes and linsas, which she stated that tasted like nuggets and cherry lollipop.
Lastly, in our conclusion, according to the findings, the TD synesthetic experiences were very constant, occurred more frequently in English words than in non-words, and were almost never unpleasant, in spite of the fact that TD outperformed control participants in terms of recalling novel word taste associations. Her reported experiences cannot be entirely explained by either exceptional non-synthetic learning of taste word associations over time, or a distinct response to phonemes rather than whole words.